Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We're here at Justice Community Protection Camp. It's the 39th day of protesting and raising awareness outside Greater Manchester Police Headquarters. We've come today to ask Martin Foran and Joanne, Hynd, why they're here today. We'll start with Martin Foran. Martin, would you like to say a few words on why have you decided to join our campaign?
I'm here today and most days to highlight police corruption. Police lies just don't harm one person, they harm everyone. I was shopping back in 1977. My wife was pregnant. We had got that morning a loan from the Provident to buy a pram. I went from my home to go into the bank to cash the check. I came out of the bank, I went into the butcher's, which was 2 doors from the bank, and I got into my car, and as I came around the corner, the police were stopping everyone. I rolled my window down and I asked the young constable what was happening, and he said there's been a robbery and they're stopping everyone. Just then I heard the CID officer say, "He's Irish, he will fucking do." When I got up near him, I got dragged out of the car. Dragged into a car park and bungled into a police car, took to the police station. After being in the police station for an hour, the cell door opens and it says, "That day you confessed to 2 robberies," and closed the door. I was lost in my thoughts, wondering what the heck was going on. Eventually it came to the Crown Court in Birmingham. This all happened in Birmingham by the Serious Crime Squad, who were notorious for setting up people, but at my stage in 1977 it wasn't starting to unfold properly. The only evidence against me was the word of 2 police officers saying that I told them that I'd done this robbery. I never spoke to them. They just opened the door and closed it. The court was told that a sword used on the robbery had my fingerprints on it. They said a witness picked me out on an ID parade, but they didn't tell the court that the ID witness was eventually to say that the police showed her my photograph before the ID parade and said, "That's the man there that done the robbery, we know he's guilty." We found out that years later. I was sentenced to 10 years in prison. I fought every single day of it, on rooftops, everything. 3 years into my sentence, the Chief Constable of the West Midlands Police, similar to this Chief Constable over here, out and out liars, sent me a letter when I was in prison saying he was sorry a mistake was made at my trial. The fingerprints of the man who done the robbery that was on the sword was not my fingerprints. So I thought, great, I'm going to get sent home at last. And the person who picked out my photograph, she said I wasn't the person that robbed her. So we went to the appeal court and my case made history because the judge called the people who was robbed into the court and said, "Is that the man that robbed you?" And they all said no. He said, and I quote, "How can this be a case of mistaken identification when you were never identified as the robber in the first place?" And sent me back to prison. Second time I appealed because I found out by now the Birmingham pub bombers case was breaking, and I found out 4 of the officers in my case were involved in that case, so I appealed. The Assistant Chief Constable of the West Midlands came to the appeal court and stood in court and said I was an out-and-out liar, that none of the officers in my case had been involved in the Birmingham's pub bombing case. 6 months later, I get the list of all the officers, and all the officers in my case are on the Birmingham 6 case. I continued to protest. When I came out of prison, I was only out a few weeks when I was again pulled by the Serious Crime Squad, said if you don't stop protesting, we'll put you back in again. I made the mistake of laughing at them, thinking it could never happen again, but it did. Within a week, I was arrested, same officers, banged up again. Can you imagine my state being innocent again and being in prison and screaming? I went to the same Birmingham court again. The people who were robbed, one of them was an ex-policeman. He come into the court and he told the judge, he said, "A mistake here, that's not the man that robbed me." And the judge asked him, he said, "I've been an ex-police officer, I was in the police force for 30 years. Didn't matter. I was sentenced to 10 years because of my nationality." But what the police done then, they said the night of the Birmingham pub bombings, they seen me running from the scene. I was in prison when the Birmingham pub bombings took place. I wound up back in again, but the second time from hunger strikes, I became seriously ill in prison. I knew there was something wrong with me, but I didn't know what. And every time I was due to see a surgeon, they'd move me from prison to prison. I was in Wandsworth prison, again on hunger strike in 1986, when at 3 o'clock in the morning, my door flies opened, when they were coming in to assist me in a suicide. Basically what they were trying to do is hang me. But I fought. Years later, I got a hold of my prison record, and in the record, and a lot of people have seen it, it said the sooner I'm assisted in a suicide, the better for everyone concerned. Another letter from the doctor to all members of the hospital staff: nothing must be done to aid or comfort me. Letters from the Home Office, which I can prove, saying the sooner I'm assisted in a suicide, the better for everyone concerned. My list is endless. But as much as my suffering was, I was to learn that people had suffered more. I'm sitting here alongside a lady whose name is Joanne. When I came here, I've lived in Manchester for a few years, and I'm ashamed to say I did not open to my eyes to what was going on in Manchester. Her son was killed in police custody, and I would like you to listen to her story. Mine is bad, but I'm here to tell my story. She is here to speak about her son, and this case I feel is far greater. I'm alive, her son isn't, but he's not going to be forgotten, and while I'm alive I will highlight it. I would like you to speak to Joanne.
Yes, John, please.
Yeah, thank you, Martin. But still, at the end of the day, your life was robbed all them years. You know, it shouldn't have been done, and you know, we fully support your case as well. So we're glad to meet you as well. Yeah. My case is about my son Billy. He was handing himself in over a tag. He'd broke his tag to Chidleave Police Station on the 6th of July. It was the early hours of 6th of July 2012. He went with his sister, and his sister walked into the door and left him with the police officer thinking he was safe and off the streets, and with that she left. We got a call on the Friday saying that Billy was in hospital, and he was in intensive care. With that, we found out from them Billy had actually handed himself in, made the police aware he was epileptic and on medication. A doctor had come to see him, asked him what medication he was on. Billy told him what medication he was on. that he had none on him and he had none at home. The police made no attempt at that time, or the doctor, to get him any of his medication. So with that, he'd already missed one dose. And if you're an epileptic, you'll know that people, you miss one dose, you're at greater risk of having a seizure, which he did. He actually had a seizure within 3-4 minutes of actually seeing the doctor. He was found on the cell floor, to which the officer said they find many prisoners on the floor, which you do. I do admit, you do find them on the cell floor, but you would have thought 15 minutes earlier you've got a young lively boy who's just been to see a doctor, he's asked for a brew, you come back in that cell and find him on the floor. He must have seen the sick and smelt the urine, because he's actually wet himself having the seizure, and think why he's not actually drunk the cup of tea. Instead of it, he touched him and walked out the cell. He picked the brew up and he walked out the cell and left him there. It wasn't picked up on the camera. Nobody apparently seen him having this seizure. The police didn't even know how to rewind the CCTV. None of them were qualified to rewind CCTV, so they never checked. The following morning, the officer who was supposed to be interviewing Billy went in to see Billy, and he said that he didn't look well at all. When the solicitor come, they both agreed that Billy didn't look well enough. He really looked very pale and poorly. The solicitor had actually said to Billy, is that sick? And Billy didn't even know he'd been sick. He said, no, it's food. She said, no, it's sick. And that's when Billy said, I think I've had a seizure. To which she said, yeah, it looks like you have. She has a family member who suffers from seizures, so she knew what she knew what the signs were. And obviously Billy had a bump on his head at this time. So with that, the solicitor and the officer went to the desk sergeant to report how Billy was. And this desk sergeant didn't bother to go and check to see how Billy was. All he said was, I'll get the doctor out or the nurse out. At this time, they're still saying that Billy needs his medication, and still no medication has been brought to the police station at this time. It's getting on for nearly tea time now, and still no medication's there. The nurse then comes to the station, and vital information was not passed on to the nurse. So the nurse just got told that Billy was feeling unwell. He never got told that he's had a bump to his head. He never got told that he might have had a seizure at the night time. He never got told that he'd been sick. And obviously Billy thought he was going to get his medication from the nurse. So when Billy went in to see the nurse, and you've got the nurse saying, what medication are you on? When was you last on it? Asking him all these questions, how old are you, where do you live, blah, blah, blah. Billy then gets a bit upset with him because all he wants is his medication, and he thinks that's what he's getting, his medication, but still they haven't got the medication yet. So he stands up and he walks out and says, forget it, you can't help me, nobody can help me, and off he goes. That nurse then circles the box saying the medical is complete, when it wasn't in fact complete because Billy walked out. Apparently then the nurse has gone back to the desk sergeant. Whether or not they did talk, we don't know, because they were all blaming each other at the inquest. The nurse was told to go to Billy's flat and retrieve his medication. The police are denying that ever was mentioned. So nothing got done from that nurse. Billy went back to his cell and just left to be poorly. Eventually they did send an officer out to get his medication. It was 17 hours later in all. So he did get his medication at about 6:30 p.m. that night. He got his medication. still, like, the sergeant that was on at that shift didn't bother to go and see how Billy was, even though he'd heard them say that he'd had a seizure, he'd bumped his head, he'd been sick. He didn't take it upon himself to actually visit my son physically to see if he was okay, even though he had a duty of care to look after my son. He never bothered to do that. Anyway, with that, Billy eventually did do his interview just to get it over and done with. And then he slept most of that day and night. Got a bit aggravated in the night over some food. But then obviously he threw food around his cell. He was upset over something, we don't know what. I have watched it on CCTV. He actually breaks down, says sorry, cleans up the mess of his cell, and then goes back to bed and sleeps again to the following morning. They come in again with his medication, give him his medication, and then 2 hours after that you see him having another seizure, which lasts about 5 or 6 minutes. While he's having this seizure, the door hatch in between that opens as if they've noticed him having a seizure, and they look through. As soon as he finishes having his seizure, the light in the cell actually flickers on and flickers off, and you can see on another part of the camera in the bit where the officers all are, they're testing out the lights. And when I asked them why did they switch the light on and off at that time, they told me that they did a light check daily. They were doing daily light checks.
What time was it?
What time did they do the light checks? It was around, well, the seizure was about 8-10 in the morning. So they did the light checks at that time. To which I said to them, well, if they do that daily, why didn't you do that the day before then? Because I watched both CCTV I watched 33 hours of CCTV and they never did the light checks the previous morning. So to me, they had seen that seizure and they were checking he was, after he'd had that seizure, which was really a horrible seizure to watch. They were checking to see if he was all right in my eyes. I believe they'd actually seen him have that seizure. When they pick him up ready to go to court, you can see him grabbing his head and holding his head. Whether or not Billy knew he had another seizure, I don't know. He probably would have felt really, really poorly then, but you can just see he doesn't want to go to court. He can't comprehend what he has to go to court, and you can see the officers shoving his pants in front of his face, and Billy saying no, I don't want to go, and they're like taunting him and stuff like that. And obviously his clothes are saturated in urine because he's had seizures, and he does wet himself when he's had seizures, but they make him put them on, and you do see Billy stand up. He does get dressed in these clothes, and he's still got the t-shirt on that's covered in sick and stuff, and that's the last time I seen my son alive walking out that door. What happens in Geo Amy's van I do not know. Apparently the officer said to Billy, is that sick on your t-shirt? And Billy said, no, it's food. I don't know whether he was embarrassed or whether he was unaware that he'd been sick after the first seizure. But apparently he got to court and they were aware that Billy might have had a seizure the night before. They got told that. They didn't do the proper checks. They were late with the cell checks and everything. And after he'd seen his solicitor at 10:30, Billy was not checked till, I think they said 11:55. He was checked at 11:55, and they were saying everything was well, but when they went back at 12:15, my son was found collapsed. His body was twisted it was contorted in a way that they'd never seen. They didn't think a body could have got in that position. He was half on the floor and half on a bench. His head was on a bench, his neck was leaning against the bench how he'd fell, with his eyes wide open, and he was actually dead. He was found dead in a cell. So one of the staff said, I thought he was dead, and he was actually dead. When the ambulance had got there, He was actually flatlined. He had no pulse, he had no heartbeat. He was clinically dead. Obviously the people in the cells had started resuscitation, and then, like I say, when the ambulance had got there, put adrenaline in, got a heartbeat, managed to get him in the ambulance. He had another heart attack, managed to stable him again to get to hospital. He had another heart attack in hospital, managed to stabilise him again to get him into intensive care. Intensive care, and that's where he stayed for 2 days. They were doing all tests, but they actually said his brain was coning. It was swelling to the point where your pupils actually blow out. So one of his pupils had already blown out, and so over the course of them 2 days over the weekend, his second pupil blew out. His blood pressure went that high, and he was just basically dying in front of us. Well, he was, like I say, he was already dead anyway. They just kept him alive for their benefit, really. They didn't want to say that he'd actually died in the court cells. So yeah, I was put in the position to turn off his life support machine, and he died on that Monday.
Thank you for speaking about it, Joanne. It's literally horrible to have to listen to something like this. They are responsible for his death and other people's deaths in police custody. Shouldn't they have trained medical officers in the police stations? No one has yet ever been charged with people that die in custody. Surely someone must answer to this mother for her son. Why is there no police officer charged? Why is there no public inquiry into it? Why is it nothing but cover-ups? Surely something must be done about this. How many more deaths in custody must people suffer before someone will do something? And those who are listening to this later on, don't sit at home thinking, oh, it's someone else's son. It could happen to anyone. Her son, they knew he was ill. He handed himself into a police station. Little did he know that he was handing himself into death from lack of care. They are actually guilty. They took part in his murder by not treating him. They knew he was ill. The person that looked in that hatch, what conscience? Have they got any conscience? What about the so-called nurse that came? They could see the young lad was ill, and they left him die. Surely enough is enough. When will the people of Britain say enough is enough? Something must be done to stop this before other mothers lose their sons, other people lose their children at the hands of the police. That's why we're here. They don't answer to anyone. Something has to change. And please, if you're listening to this, get a letter to your MP. Go and see your councillor. Go and complain to the police, because enough is enough. Over to you, Boris.
Thank you, Martin. Joanne, so what was the outcome of the case? Have they? I've heard the police had come up with a few recommendations. That's it, isn't it?
Yeah. What they did was, because the coroner said that the gross negligence bar was so high that even though the three different companies, like the police, Medax and GeoAmy, because that wasn't high enough. They could not particularly pinpoint one person for gross negligence, which in my eyes is really wrong. So they could all stand there and say, yeah, we neglected him, but nobody could actually be done for it. So I don't understand that. I don't get it. You know, they could all say, yeah, we didn't do risk assessments properly, we didn't do a duty of care properly, you know, this information was missed, that was missed. I don't understand how they could all stand there and have the gall to say that, and yet she put it down to natural causes at the end of the day. He actually died of hypoxic brain damage due to heart attacks, due to epilepsy, and that boils down to his medication. Even the coroner twisted my words about his medication, saying that, well, you know, even if he didn't have his medication, he was going to have seizures anyway. Now, in that time, when you can't even get your head around, still today I haven't got my head around, Billy's not here, standing here with the top on, saying my son's died, I can't really get it in my head. I have to ignore that's really happened, because it's too scary to admit one of my children have gone, you know, that doesn't work, it's not supposed to work that way, your kids don't go before you. So for her to just say he died of natural causes, it's just like, is she having a laugh here? Are they all having a laugh?
Can I just ask you a question there? You said, can you just repeat what the coroner said about the negligence?
Yeah, even though she was, I've got the report, and I must give you the report so you can all read it, but she was saying that even she was worried about the way that they've all gone about their duties, of how they treated Billy, lack of duties, yeah, and she was worried, and she's actually putting recommendations so that there is no further deaths. So to me that's, well, he died because of these recommendations not been in place. But what was weird is a boy had already died in 2010 called Craig Young in the same police station, and 2 police officers were done for gross misconduct. We don't know what's happened to them officers yet. We've never found out. I'm still trying to find out what happened to them. But they put in recommendations for him, and in March 2012 they had a surprise visit, what they do, and there was 42 recommendations put in place, and the top 2 was risk assessment and handovers. They were the main top 2. Yeah, and so in July, after that March, they were the main top 2 that they let Billy down on. They were the main top 2, so they were already in place. They should have already been in place, but they weren't. That's what they let my Billy down on.
It sounds from what you're saying that the coroner took part in a cover-up. Yeah. She's 1 minute saying, oh, something is wrong, that negligence, but not doing anything about it. Yeah. So I just have to sit here and wonder if that had been an MP's son or someone like that, someone would have been charged. And as you said, in the same police station, how many people must die in police stations before the general public saying enough is enough? And you have a coroner that's saying, oh, something is wrong, something should be done. They all say, we've been listening for donkey's years, we'll make different recommendations. At the end, there's nothing done. Yeah.
She actually said she was happy with the recommendations that they put in place after the Craig Young death. She was happy with them. And yet,
she was happy with them. Why was your son allowed to die? Exactly. So she's contradicting herself there. Yeah. She's part of the cover-up, because she can't say that she was happy with the young thing, and then turn around and your son died in a police station. Yeah. She's contradicting herself there, and it proves she's part of the system. And she is covering up. Someone should stand in court for at least the manslaughter of your son.
I tried to stand up in court, and I said, can I say a few words? And she said no, and I said, oh, I'm sorry, I'm going to say them anyway. I had to sit there for 2 weeks to listen how they treated my son, how they neglected him, ignored everything that had gone on. I was 2 minutes down the road. I could have got them tablets if they had let me know, and any other time they have let me know. For this reason, I don't know why they didn't get in touch with me this time.
What age was Billy?
He was 19.
19. So they should have contacted you. When he was ill, they should have contacted
me, because as well, he had ADHD, but he wasn't just a normal 19-year-old. He had a mind of a 14-year-old, so he wasn't fully compass mentis as an adult. He had tablets in his flat. That's where they recovered him from, but he would have thought, my flat's a mess, I'm not letting him go in. He wouldn't have thought of the consequence of his health. He would have just thought it'd be easier not to say go in my house.
So the sadness of this is they keep telling us that they owe us a duty of care. Yeah. These are the people who care the place. Her son walked in, his sister was on an impression he was going to be cared about. Yeah. Little did she realise he was going to be murdered. This has got to stop. And if people don't speak out, who's the next death going to be? It's got gone on and on. How many more deaths? We went to Hull last week and we seen something similar to yours, where Christopher, what was his surname? Holder, was left. You can see it, everyone can see the video. He's lying on the floor because he was coloured. They're going around him. He's dying on the floor and they're going around pretending to be monkeys. And he was left to die in the same thing in a police cell. Now that was 16 years ago. No one has learned nothing from them. How many people all over, how many cases that we don't know about? Something has to be done. And that's one of the reasons we're here, and that's one of the reasons I'm here trying to support. My case is a nightmare, but Joanne's case is a bigger nightmare. Her son walks into the police station and he comes home in a coffin. What the heck is going on in this country? Isn't this what happened in Nazi Germany? They can kill people and there's no accountability for it. They have to answer. And if we, the public, don't stand together and say enough is enough, they're going to walk all over us.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, if anybody who's watching us has got a story to tell, they're more than welcome to come and speak out. They need to. Please don't assume that sitting in front of a tele or sitting at home on your own, you'll be able to deal with this issue on your own. You need support. You need to come and tell your story.
Yeah, contact us on
Justice Community Protection Camp. It's on Facebook. We've set a Facebook page for this camp. So if you want to come and tell your story, you're more than welcome. Yeah. We'll do everything we can to help you, support you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you.